meeting of the Higher Education Subcommittee of Appropriations will come to order. I think our first order of business is to introduce our new members and have them introduce themselves, and then everybody else on the committee say so. So if we'll start down at the end.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Delegate Amy Laufer, and I represent the 55th District, which is parts of Albemarle, Nelson, Louisa, and a tiny sliver of Fluvanna. Thank you.
Good morning, Delegate Josh Thomas of the 21st District, representing Western Prince William County.
Good morning. Alex Askew, delegate from the 95th District. I represent Western Virginia Beach and Eastern Norfolk.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'm Delegate David Reed. I represent House District 28, which is in the eastern portion of Loudoun County.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Delegate Terry Alston. I represent the 37th House District as western part of the state.
Thank you. And I'm Delegate Betsy Carr. I have the privilege of representing the 78th District, which is a portion of Richmond. Also, we'll be hearing from our analyst, Tony Maggio. And we start out with your introduction first.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Tony Maggio, staff from House Appropriations, primarily for higher education.
Thank you. Should we hear the bill first or the, yeah. All right, we have before us HB 414 by Delegate Guzman. This is something that we've looked at before, and
Do you need to take the roll?
oh yeah, let's take the roll first, please. If members will please register on the board. There. Thank you, and we have a quorum. Thank you very much. All right, now we'll move to hearing bills. HB 414, Delegate Guzman. You want to tell us briefly about this?
Sure.
We've heard this before.
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. I bring up to you House Bill 414. For those who have been serving here since 2022, Republicans and Democrats have voted for this bill in the House. It passed with unanimous support. And what we're trying to do is clean up the code. Back in 2021, the federal government got rid of the selective service form for male applicants for financial aid. And now what we're trying to do is, Virginia is still requiring it, and we need to change it because we are harming male students who live under poverty, who are looking for aid. If they don't fill out this form in a timely manner, what happens is they won't be eligible to get this, the Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant, and then they will be curbed to go to private loans. So it's in a nutshell what we are trying to do, something that it's the right thing to do to help male students to get access to higher education. And I hope that you support it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. And there is no fiscal impact.
That's right. Thank you. And I would like to thank the staff for the note that they sent us that there's no physical impact.
Right. Thank you. Any comments in favor of this bill? All right.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I'm Ellen Davenport with the Virginia Community College System, and we wholeheartedly support this bill. We thank Delegate Guzman for putting it in. It really reduces the administrative burden on our staff who've been trying to monitor this, and it doesn't make sense anymore to have this requirement since the FAFSA form on the national level has been adjusted to remove it. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody to speak in opposition to the bill? All right. Committee moves by motions.
I make a motion that we report the bill.
Second.
All right. We indicate your preference on the board, please. Thank you, Delegate Guzman. Your bill passes 6-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Mr. Maggio and give us a background on how we're moving into and what we're moving into.
So, good morning, and again, welcome to the new members. has been kind of somewhat tradition, especially when we have a bit of turnover. I try to provide a little bit of a high-level overview of higher education, because you'll start hearing some terms over the years, and this might help you in trying to parse your way through that. With the higher education, there are three major programs. There's the Education in General program, and that's often you'll hear it referred to as the E&G. That's what we're talking about there. That's the focus of the funding guidelines, and really it's the only place where the general fund has any sort of impact. Then the other one is the Auxiliary Enterprise. I refer to it often as Club Ed. This is the social program part of, if you will. That's what Minister Ridenow used to call it. It's the social programs. It's the dorms, the dining, the athletics, the student union, recreational services, all those kind of things. And then lastly is the sponsored programs, and that is essentially research, federally funded research. That's the overwhelming amount of money. You'll recall when H.R. 1 came out, there was a lot of discussion about the indirect cost caps that were being placed. That emanates from here. There's overhead that institutions are able to charge against those grants, and that money flows to the institution. So those are the three major direct programs, if you will, for higher education. We'll focus on the E&G at the start of this. Within E&G, there are sub-programs, and these first three that are listed here are the direct costs, if you will, of E&G. Instruction is the single largest one. It's where all your faculty will reside for the most part. It's the various programs there. The first professional programs are there. There's sub-programs within this: medicine, dentistry, vet med, et cetera. There are also some other items in there. There's the community education piece. We'll touch on that shortly here too. And then there's some other programs for the med schools. They have a family practice sub-program, which is money in support of some of the residency programs that they have. On the research that you see here, this is not the same kind of research. It's called that. This is mostly, there are some research centers at some of the institutions, the Center for Politics, as an example. Then there's also departmental research, the curriculum development, that portion. And then lastly, there's public service, mostly outreach programs, public lecture series. This is entirely self-supporting. They generate these monies typically from outside sources or from fees that they might charge to the users of it. But those are the three direct programs. And then we have a series of support programs. Academic support, that's the provost, the libraries. It's the academic administration of the institution. There's student services where you'll find the financial aid administration, admissions, registrar, the career services, things like that. Pure overhead, and on the next sub-program is the institutional support, your budget office, procurement, human resources, the campus police, the president's office will fall underneath here, and then operation and maintenance of plant, it's the physical plant, it's the custodial services, it's the building maintenance, building and grounds maintenance, it's your utility costs. So that's kind of the breakout of the E&G part, and we talked about how within E&G it's where the general fund that you focus your dollars on. But the general fund, you'll hear the term fund split being used often. An institution's fund split, how much general fund percent that they get. And the fund split share is primarily a function of student mix. More in-state students that you have, the more general fund you're likely to receive. The other piece of it that is there, the part of that is you probably heard the term, it's the 67% goal. Well, that goal is the goal for the in-state students within the institution and trying to pay 2/3 of the cost of those students, or subsidizing them at 2/3 for the cost of attending the institution. Program mix is also a function here. There are some programs that we've mentioned, like community ed and such, that are purely 100% funded through non-general fund. But also some of your graduate programs, law programs, things like that, generate more revenues than typically from, your undergraduate program. And then the last piece of this, too, is what the actual fund split itself, what an institution actually has, is also going to be impacted by their out-of-state population and the ability that they have to generate revenue from those. UVA and William & Mary are two big examples there. They generate far more money from out-of-state students than they do from any other group. I think UVA's point has always been that they get 2/3 of their money from 1/3 of their students. And that's very true. And so those are the kind of the classic examples of institutions that have revenue generating ability on that side that impacts their actual mix. But to put it in maybe just more summary terms, here's a table. That's a lot to look at there, but this table is sorted in fund split order from the highest fund split down to the lowest. And so as you can see, VCCS is at the top end of this. Their fund split's about 64%. They also have the highest proportion of in-state students, 96%. So that's what's driving this. At the low end of the range is UVA. They're only about a 32% kind of fund split. 55% of their students are in-state. Now, that's not just undergraduate. Graduate and first professional programs are a mix in there, and graduate and first professional programs across institutions tend to have a much more favorable mix of out-of-state students as opposed to the undergraduate programs. So you see where that goes. Now, over the years, the goal of the body has been to try to support moderate growth in tuition. In the early 1990s, the General Assembly used a number of tools, General Assembly and Governor. There were tuition caps that were put in place back in the early 90s. There was a tuition freeze that ended up getting put in place for a number of years in the middle 90s. And then later on, towards the end of the 90s, there was actually a tuition rollback that was initiated by then Governor Gilmore, because the state a lot of money was flowing into the state. This was that dot-com boom at the time. The problem with those three tools is that they don't last. They're very money dependent. If you roll back tuition, you replace it with general fund. If you have to cut, and higher education is one of the few discretionary parts of the budget, and they have been cut over the years, what backfills is the tuition. So, as a policy, we've moved away from that, and we've moved more towards something about trying to moderate growth. And so this slide shows you what's happened in the last 15 or 16 years. And so the green line is general fund support per FTE. This is all in constant $25. So I take the inflation out of the equation here. And you can see in the early parts from 2009, when the housing bubble burst, general fund support decreased significantly up to 2012. And tuition, as you can see by the blue line, increased significantly. But, you see the point there, a 21% decrease in general fund led to a 65% increase in the tuition rates. But beginning in 2018, 2019, there was some much more definite efforts to try to moderate the tuition and the investment in tuition, and the investment in higher ed grew significantly. It grew by 37% since 2019, and that's resulted in an 11% decrease on constant dollar terms in what students pay. Now, not that the bills are lower, but relatively speaking, relative to what inflation would drive, they are coming down. That's the four-year colleges. At the two-year colleges, it's a similar looking chart. The one difference here is that at the community colleges, there's a third factor that's involved here. They've had a major shift in their enrollment since 2009. It's dropped about 16%. That impacts some of these per unit costs, if you will. But the impact is still the same. As general fund has grown, the community colleges have been able, in many cases, to not increase tuition at all for several years. And I know that some of the enrollment's starting to come back slightly now, so we'll see how that plays. Another item within higher education, and you'll hear talked about often, are the 6-year plans. This was a process that your staff had proposed back in 2010. There were conversations that used to be had with colleges about, well, you all only look at the 2-year period. You're not looking at the longer view. And so we basically called them on it. Okay, well, let's take a 6-year look at what you want to do. And the idea at the time was, this all became part of the restructuring effort, was how can we as a state at that point, we wanted to have conversations with everybody in the room at the same time so that they heard the same story. It used to be that, the story would change depending upon the audience. So, I'm not saying who, but institutions would come forward and say one thing to one House member, something to another House member perhaps. The Senate might have been a different story, the governor another. So we created this 6-year plan group, which is basically composed of secretaries of finance and education, the director of SHEV, the director of planning and budget, and your two staff, and the 2 staff directors, House and Senate Money Committee staff directors, and then all the others, folks like me, that we all hang on, so to speak. But we have these meetings, and we have we begin to have relevant conversations with the institutions where we're all hearing their plans, their proposals going forward. We can ask questions at that point. Are the plans realistic? We've had institutions that have come forward that wanted to start schools of engineering just because they thought that was the thing to do. And we've, tried to pat down some of the expectations. Some of it are plans that they have to meet, needs that they want. Some of them are to satisfy constituencies on campus. But at least we have these conversations, and it's just beginning of that. And then we also had that conversation with them on how they plan to fund those things. If there's no general fund, what are you going to do with your tuition? How much is your tuition going to go up? And then the state, at least at that point, the Commonwealth at that point, can then figure out what they want to partner with and how do they want to target the general fund dollars they have to accomplish their goals, which is greater access for the in-state students and greater affordability for the students. So that became part of it. I point out that you can see here that there's 2 links that if you want to look at the plans in greater detail, they're available on SHEV's website. And there are these fact packs that are now available. That was something that's been added in the last few years. If you're data hungry, it's the place to go. Just make sure that you have a good appetite because it's a lot of data. Next area is the financial aid. And go forward. So within financial aid, you have 2 major items. You have grants and you have loans. In grant programs, 2 major grant programs. The Pell Grant is obviously, that's been around for a number of years. And then we have state financial aid programs. I'll touch more on some of those here shortly. It's under the Guaranteed Assistance Program or the Commonwealth program. And there's also some funding that institutions will provide through the use of tuition, in some cases through their endowment, if they have an endowment that they can tap into. On the loan programs, this is primarily, overwhelmingly federal programs. The Stafford program, both subsidized and unsubsidized, and then the PLUS programs. There are some private loans too. And then in order to qualify for these, you have to file a FAFSA. And that's, that's been simplified over the last few years, but it's still a fairly intense process for the applicants themselves. When H.R. 1 came out, it's put in some changes on Pell eligibility. The Student Aid Index, the SAI, it's put a cap that twice, if your aid index is twice the or equal to the Pell Award. That's about $14,000. If that SAI is $14,000, you wouldn't be, it would exclude you. I would say that an SAI of about $14,000 equates somewhere to $95,000 family income for a family with one, or a family of four, about $125,000. The old system, the EFCs, the expected family contribution, when they were at family incomes of $70,000 to $80,000, Pell Awards started to fall off the table somewhat. So the impact on this at this point is still to be determined. Student loan changes, though, are more significant. There are caps and limits that have been put in place. This is going to impact graduate students significantly over the next few years in the way they are right now. And then also there are accountability measures where if the earnings of a student coming out of programs falls for 2 consecutive years to get a premium that they've calculated, then there are programs that if students in those programs may not be eligible for any of the loans. This may impact maybe the associate's degree more than the senior level institutions, but there are some programs that are at risk. Chev has identified them. Now, financial aid has also seen some significant increases over time. This chart shows the data from 1996, but I'm going to talk, but basically since 2004, again in constant $24, financial aid has increased about 250%. And that's a sizable increase. The only thing I will point out, and we'll touch on this again here shortly, is that even though financial aid was increasing, tuition didn't decrease over that time. Tuition decreases have come when you've done more investment on the moderation side. Perhaps both things in concert with each other work well, but trying to get your tuition under control, financial aid doesn't necessarily do that. That's at the 2-year institutions. Again, a similar looking effort chart for the community colleges. We talked about how institutions use tuition to create grants for other students. And this has grown significantly. Since 2012, the percent of the use of tuition for financial aid has grown by about 350%. You could see on the left side, the chart, the dollar amounts and the percentage of tuition that were done at institutions. And in some cases, I mean, it's grown tenfold almost, or so. It is something to take a look at. This is a popular tool for institutions, but it's also in some cases when you're in the 20% range, basically that means that 20% of what you pay to an institution as a student is being used to pay for somebody else's cost. And we will touch on that here in just a second. 7 institutions use 9% or more. Now, UVA is about 29%, but only 37% of their undergraduates have need. Mary Washington's 26%, about 45% of their undergraduates have need. VCU's at 22%, 61% of their undergraduates have need. All right, so William & Mary, 18, 41%, Longwood, 13% is used, and the 60% with need. The two that are perhaps give me greater pause are the 2 HBCUs that use 9% and 12% when almost 90% of their kids have need. So essentially, it's very difficult to understand whether this is a sustainable practice. Because basically for some of the students, it's money just being passed among the students themselves, and I don't know what that accomplishes. More money into financial aid perhaps would ask for the institutions maybe to take these dollars and redeploy them, especially for those that are at the higher end of the percentage, and the higher end of the needs scale might be something that you might want to take a look at going forward. That would help the institution, but also help the students that have to pay this that don't get any aid out of it. So, so that's the purpose of the question. Is it sustainable? Is it practical? Should there be some limits on this? For UVA, this is not a problem. For William & Mary, this is probably not a problem. For the other institutions, with the student demographics that they have, it might be. Student debt. This is actually, this is some sobering information. This is national data. There is $1.8 trillion of student debt out there right now. There's about 43 million borrowers. The debt has doubled since 2008. Mostly graduate students, 60% of the graduate students account for the borrowing. Average federal debt is close to $40,000. And the Stafford program alone is about $890 billion of that $1.8 trillion. And that's mainly in the unsubsidized loan program. Now, in Virginia, the story is, there is some good news here. Since 2009, the number of students borrowing has steadily declined, and you could see even since 2015, and in constant dollar terms, again, they're actually borrowing. The average loan amount is lower today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Again, I think some of that is a function of you've brought down tuition, you've kept tuition growth at or below the rate of inflation, and that's helping all students, especially those that have to borrow. There are some other programs, the TAG program. This is something that's been in effect for many decades. It's how we are able to help support Virginia students at the private not-for-profit institutions. It's about $112 million. The average award right now is $52.50. It serves about almost 22,000 undergraduate students. There's no need component in here. This is the equivalent of the general fund subsidy that we give to our public institutions. But even though there's no need base to it, about 3/4 of the students are from low and middle income families at the private institutions. And the best benefit for it is it takes some pressure off of the public institutions and the state. At $52.50 per student, that is close to half of what the average subsidy might be at the public institutions. So if all these students were at public institutions, your general fund subsidy costs would be higher. Your capital costs might be higher. They may not have the space necessary to accommodate 22,000, depending upon where they go. So what are the issues going forward that, as a subcommittee, that you're going to have to kind of address for this session and then even beyond? The first thing is, in 2025, the last session, the House provided about $100 million of funding to address affordable access, to address the healthcare, nursing, medical items that were out, workforce shortages. The introduced budget that we received provides only about 25% of the money, and in the first year only. So one of the things I think as staff that we will bring to your attention is the idea about putting that money back in to continue it as a base. Remember, the institutions are able to moderate tuition based upon one-time money. So coming into 27, if that money is not continued, those tuition decisions they made coming into fiscal 26 have to be rethought. This doesn't address 27 and 28. This is just essentially something to fix the base itself. But some things that you might want to consider to go along with this, again, and these are not new items, we've talked about this before, access requirements. You're putting significant dollars out there. I think the expectation that there are spots available for Virginia students, in-state undergraduate students, is something to consider. Outcome-based allocations, especially with the workforce piece of this. If there are institutions that are saying, we want to produce more nurses, we're going to produce more of whatever it might be, that perhaps some portion of that money might hinge on, okay, here's a baseline of money so you can move the program forward. The rest of the money comes when you show me, when you have produced more of X, Y, or Z. And that is something that, perhaps, should be considered. And then the other piece to consider as you're looking at this is the institution's ability to generate their own revenue. Right now, since COVID, institutions, several of them, their ability to actually generate revenue has been shrunk. Students are much more value conscious, cost conscious, and there are too many more options that are out there. One thing, and I think I'm speaking to one of your colleagues, in some cases, it's cheaper to go to an out-of-state institution than it is to stay as an in-state student here. That's because places like South Carolina, Alabama, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, several others are doing the Priceline approach to trying to poach students. They're offering them deeply discounted rates because a student in a chair there is better than no student there. So they'll take the partial funding. And we're losing students to that. And we're losing out-of-state students that would come here to those. So some flexibility in some of this needs to be looked at. Whether just simply increasing financial aid is going to address affordability, I think is something that's at question. 40 to 50% of the students are identified as having need, but only about 40 or 45% of them actually get any aid, which means that financial aid helps about half of your population, but the other half of the population is paying full price or close to it. So, something that in terms of, you've seen from these other charts that there is a correlation between greater general fund support and the tuition being somewhat moderated. You can look at factors such as CPI or median wage growth and tie, some of the tuition growth to that, or at least evaluate it based on that. But I think the idea of one or the other, perhaps both working in tandem is the direction that you want to go. Also, current financial aid programs are over 40 years old. The model that we have, it's a Model T, and we're in an electric vehicle age right now, right? So, new aid programs, there's some reform efforts, I think, that are underway to simplify things, which is probably good. But you might want to also consider other programs. We are constantly trying to target certain degree programs. Do we target some aid at certain degree programs? And then the last point, and I just keep this as a general thing, the state needs to evaluate all waiver programs looking forward. It's something that is taking up a large portion. This is foregone revenue, and it's becoming a significant drain on each institution. Okay, so I'm going to get into this, and this is not about IU. This is going to be about athletics, though. But I mentioned auxiliaries earlier. Auxiliaries are self-supporting, mainly through student fees. Your student fees is also called the comp fee. There are user charges like for dorms and dining. There are sales and services. That's the bookstore mostly, ticket sales, and then the gifts, royalty, and interest earnings. Our institutions are required to reimburse E&G for what we call the indirect cost. Your budget office spends part of its time managing auxiliary operations, custodial. There's a host of items there. Institutions either pay directly. Sometimes a person might be fund split within an institution. X% of their salary is paid for by E&G, but Y percent's being paid for by the auxiliary because of how they spend their time. But then there's also an indirect piece of this where they do a study. This is evaluated as well, and there's amount that is recouped back into E&G for the cost that E&G incurs in support of the auxiliary. That's different than most other states. The comp fee is one fee that's typically charged, whatever you might see. It's a large number, believe it, but it might be $5,000, but then it's allocated across all the auxiliary operations. So with, I think, only one exception that I can think of, there's no real athletic fee. There's no separate fee. It's just a comp fee, and then it gets distributed. It's reported. They will report the allocation separately. Chev keeps a track of how it's all allocated if you go to their website. But sometimes your athletic allocation might be going up when something else is going down. The overall comp fee might not be changing dramatically. So the distribution of that comp fee may vary from year to year. But the athletic fee amount was growing over time. So in 2015, House Bill 1897, and Kirk probably will hit me for this one, but he always laughs. It's referred to as the Cox Bill. And he always laughs because there's never, usually a member's name is not associated with the bill, but that one's become very popular, the Cox Bill. And what was done at that time was we looked at data from 230 Division I institutions. There was data that was published at the time in USA Today. I think it's in the Knight something database. There's a database out there with a tremendous amount of data. We broke it up into groups. The 1A FBS schools, that's the Power 5 conferences. We looked at all the other 1A schools, so the other conferences that were 1A football, the FBS. We looked at the 1AA, which is the FCS. That's the one that North Dakota State always wins every year, whatever it might be. But, there's a handful of schools that were there. The 1 AAA are the basketball-only schools, and then there are Division IIs and Division IIIs, and there was no individual data on those. We just relied on some summary data that the NCAA had. And when we looked at that, we analyzed the subsidy, and we came up with subsidy being how much state support, how much of the tuition or the fee support was used to subsidize athletics. And so it was the amount of fees for athletics divided by the total revenue for athletics. And we looked at that for all those institutions. And we put, for each group, a subsidy cap. So for the 1As, the ones that were the power conferences, it was a 20% cap. For the 1As that were the non-power conferences, it was a 55% cap. For the AAs that were in the FCS, it was 70%. For the AAAs, it was 78%. This is reflective of the other national institutions. For the Division II, III schools, it was higher percentages based on what the NCAA had reported. And then the only thing that we allowed the institutions to do was not take just the raw number divided by the raw number. We allowed them to make 3 adjustments. One was for that indirect cost, which is a policy choice that we have here that is different. So this part of the fee is because they're forced to do it. Some institutions keep their spirit groups under athletics, so the band and all that, which is an expensive proposition, and they're not the athletes there, but there are about 100 kids or so who were, playing the clarinet and everything else. They're also, that was allowed. And then the last thing was if there was debt service on previously approved projects, that we allowed them to discount that piece as well if it was athletics related. And so we require APA to review this annually. Every institution has kept within the guidelines that they have. And so that's been looked at. And then we also created an intercollegiate athletics commission to review requests that if institutions wanted to either add a major sport or move in within their division, they had to get approval first. JMU came forward with that several years ago, and actually, like Old Dominion, who had done it beforehand, they came forward. They were given the same 5-year phase-in to go from 1AA to 1A, and they actually achieved that in less than 5 years. They are meeting the 55% goal now. The raw data looks different, but when you discount for the 3 items that we've talked about, they are meeting that goal. Reform was meant to bend the cost curve. Prior to HB 1897, athletic fees and comp fees grew on an average of about 4% a year. After you put that into account, this is in constant dollar terms, after you put it in, the athletic fee grew at 2.3%, but the comp fee grew at about 1%. From staff's perspective, it was accomplishing what you wanted to at that point. You'd bent the curve. It wasn't that it was going to zero, it wasn't going down, it wasn't decreasing, but it was slowing the growth of it. That was the idea, to make everybody think before they simply were raising fees, because any growth in fees had to be matched by a growth in other revenues that were not fee-related. That was one of the caveats that was put in place. The last 2 years, though, have seen a shift. NIL is expanded, transfer rules, the portal, that's a big part of college sports now. The caps and the roster limits have changed. The House settlement, and then maybe one of the biggest things is realignment and conference composition. and consolidation. I mean, there are now two major conferences, to be honest, right? I mean, it's the Big Ten and the SEC. So since 2024, the last 2 years, the growth in fees has been 3.1%. I think you're seeing an uptick because institutions are trying to figure out how do they fit in with, some of these new requirements. And it's still not settled. There is an issue out there about our student athletes' employees. Would they be subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act? Is collective bargaining? They're asking for that. Title IX is still unsettled. That's something that still has to be figured out, the Title IX programs. And there's continued realignment within all the programs. So basically, it's kind of a chaotic state in sports. The fees, I think all of us would agree, fees are still too high. But the question is, we have some things in place to try to keep brakes on it and to at least evaluate where somebody is relative to what we thought was a reasonable benchmark at the time. So that's it, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Maggio. Questions from our subcommittee members? And I want to recognize Delegate Moorfield, who joined us. Thank you. Want to tell us where you're from?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I represent the 43rd District, which is the Coalfields, Southwest Virginia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Reed.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Tony. I just want to ask a question about the last stuff that you were covering, because it seems somewhat counterintuitive, because there's a growth in NIL. There's a growth in more TV revenue. I think that there was an NCAA settlement that was going to have large amounts of revenue going to, I think, the previous Big Five conferences. I guess I'm curious, with all of that revenue that is not coming from students and it's coming from outside sources, why there would still be an increase in fees?
I'll use one example because they've been in the paper recently, obviously, but I'll compare the SEC to the Sun Belt. And this is, I just looked, and again, I can't tell you, this is just my glance at some of the data from that night database. If you look at the allocations that the SEC is able to give to each of their institutions, it's in the $50 million range. The entirety of the Sun Belt Conference is $40 to $50 million. So there's not an equity across conferences. You have SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and then probably the ACC getting the bulk of it. The Pac-10, the Pac-8, whatever it is, they're gone. We had a conference that existed for decades. With huge tradition is essentially gone. Most of their schools are in the Big Ten. I'm still trying to figure out USC and UCLA and Washington and Oregon in the Big Ten. That's kind of a reach. But then again, there's Stanford and California are in the ACC. So they're next to water, but just a different ocean. So it's conferences. The Big East Conference is in terms of the way the distribution is. I think that's something that needs to be taken into account. The smaller conferences don't get a bunch of revenue. Individual institutions have done well over time, like George Mason and VCU saw a bump. The March Madness is still the biggest moneymaker, but a lot of the monies, and I might be wrong on this part of it, a lot of the monies that come from the TV monies that on football, many of those I don't believe go necessarily to the NCAA. I think some of those are conferences have contracts with certain so. It's a hodgepodge. It's the Wild West right now. It's just not really regulated very well.
Madam Chair, just
Delegate.
and I guess to follow on to that, it's like I think that I had read somewhere recently that University of Miami, which is part of the ACC, in the ACC conference, whatever money they received from being in the national championship game was theirs to keep. It was not going to be distributed to the conference, and each conference, I think, has its own set of rules.
Yes, I'm pretty sure. And the data, the things we did before, this is all public institutions. Private institutions are not required to report all that data. So it's hard to know what's going on in some of those places. But there are institutions that are able to do this with zero subsidy. Ohio State, Texas, places like that have zero subsidy. Texas has its own TV network, as I understand it. So it's easier depending upon where you are and what the monies that come in. Virginia schools, the ACC schools get a reasonable amount, and UVA and Tech have relatively modest athletic fees or their allocation to it. They've kept them. I know there was an increase recently, but those fees are lower. But if you're a small school, if you're Longwood, for example, that's only 5,000 kids, and they went to Division I many years ago for basketball purposes. But when you go to Division 1A for that purpose, for the bunch, it brings with it other costs. You have to upgrade your facilities. You have to upgrade there's a whole bunch of things that come with that, your requirements. And they're spreading, so their athletic fee, or their fee, is significant. It's because they're spreading it over only 5,000 students, whereas at Tech, it's 30,000 students. At Mason, it's 30,000 students. So, they can, same issues, but a bigger base to spread it over.
Delegate Austin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment. The ACC, there's going to be we're paying monies to NCAA for the settlement, the lawsuit, and the TV monies are going to be in the range from $60 to $40 million, depending on attendance and following and your success. So a lot of our colleges are struggling where the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the other conference, they're just doing so well. And until we get to the position that we can compete and be competitive, which, UVA did this year. They did very well in football. But I think Virginia Tech's fees are the lowest of all fees in student fees right now. And
I believe that's correct, even with the increase. I think they're still the lowest.
That's right. So, it's a constant struggle. I carried the NIL bill. I carried it as a reaction to the previous bill that I had carried. Was the first bill that said we would comply and adhere to the NCAA rules, but they weren't enforcing the rules. So we put another bill in place, and we're still behind. And I don't know. I think we're more competitive. We put ourselves in a more competitive posture, but it's going to be an uphill battle. It's an uphill challenge, and those monies are important. So if we're going to grow those programs and have those athletes be successful and move to a higher level, we need to be competitive. So it's a constant ongoing challenge to balance the scale. But I think it's going to take a reaction from the NCAA, and they're going to have to get stern and enforce what they put in place. And until they do that, I think we purely have to be reactive here. And we're at the mercy of what, Virginia Tech's this year with, letting the coach go and some other things, not having such a successful season, they stand to lose a lot of television monies because of that. And that puts us at a further disadvantage is all it does. So, Tony, I appreciate your efforts and your work. And when I introduced you, we should have introduced you as the Tony Amaggio, because you are the person who knows more about the higher ed and have worked harder in higher ed than anyone that I've ever witnessed. So thank you, Tony, for your efforts.
Thank you.
Yes.
I will have one last thing, Madam Chair. There is one item, too, that within part of this settlement that's taken place, there are some new mandates that the NCAA has placed upon institutions. I think one of the largest ones, for example, is for mental health for athletes. And so the health-related issue. That is something that's going to be a requirement for the institutions. And if we want to be consistent with what we did in 2015, it might be something that you may want to consider allowing them to, when they're doing that subsidy calculation, to look at that like we look at indirect cost. That's a policy issue as an item that they may wish to, at least be able to adjust. And APA will manage through that. So that's something just for your consideration.
Thank you. Excellent point. What other questions from our committee? Thank you so much for that very informative presentation, and I know you'll be hearing from us more. Is this online, the presentation?
It should be.
Great.
Yes, ma'am. And if you can't, I'm happy to bring you all a copy of the slides if you all want it.
I was thinking I'd like to put it in my newsletter. So that's
No.
all right.
Your newsletter.
That's right.
That's a long newsletter.
That's a link.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Any other business before the committee? Right, the committee shall rise.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you all. Thank you.